Shredding it on the keys over there. Love it. Before you guys take your seats, just want to invite you to say hello, good morning to somebody around you. Take a minute, say hi. Let's welcome each other into this space. All right. If we can go ahead and gather back around, just want to go through some announcements with everybody, some of the hip happenings of what's going on here in the church. Lots of great things going on today, next week, and in our summer ahead. So if you can just take your seats. We do have a members meeting today, after service. So we're having a member meeting right here. This is open to all members, and because it's a bit longer meeting today, there will be lunch provided after service today. So it'll focus on finances, our budget, as we get ready for the next fiscal portion of the year. And so we hope all members can make it. Parents, children will be remaining in the auditorium as well. So Pastor Mariah has prepared a couple activities for them. They'll be in the back near the food if you guys are here with kids. We also have, this is exciting, we have a Krispy Kreme fundraiser going on. Woo! Yes, I know, we all love donuts. So we have a fundraiser that's starting today. The youth has set out an ambitious goal to sell 100 dozen donuts. That's 1,200 donuts. That's quite ambitious. And we need your help to reach that goal. So it's easy to participate. There is a QR code up there on the screen. You can just pull up your smartphone camera and just look at it. It'll take you to the link. But this will take you to where you can place your order. 50% of the profits from each digital dozen sold will go directly towards the mission trip. So it's for the Amore mission trip happening later this year. We want to make sure we're all working together as a community to send people off and spread the word of God and do good in the world. So again, this is for the Krispy Kreme fundraiser. Get yourself a dozen donuts and just scan the QR code up on the screen to get started. It's pretty easy. And then next week, we also have a church picnic. That's June 30th. So we're hoping that you can join us for a potluck picnic next Sunday right after service. I'm sure it'll be warm again, so be ready for that. But we'll enjoy a nice, fun picnic together outside and just celebrate our summertime gathering. Oh, food will be provided. It is not a potluck, so don't even have to worry about putting your chef hat on. Just bring yourself, and we'll be happy to see you there. It'll be a picnic right after service, and I believe it's at a special location. Yes, if you know Akbar and Regina, they're here all the time. They're being kind enough to host us for this picnic. So it's Akbar and Regina's backyard. We're going to be hosting just a little celebration, a party there, and lunch will be provided. So this is a great opportunity to just relax, hang out with everybody, and connect, and just build our relationships together within our church community. So whether you're new or you've been here for a while, we'd love to see you there. Also, as part of worship, we do invite you, if you call Ethnos home, to direct your regular giving and donations to the box in the back corner or electronically at ethnos.us. There's that information over there as well. I'm going to turn it over to Pastor Scott, and we'll get into the message.
All right. Well, thank you. I'll say thank you to Jacob. Thank you to Mr. Jacob, because we're going to dismiss the Ethnos kids to go join him for their class. I don't usually call him Mr. Jacob, but the kids do. And so you guys can go line up on the blue tape and have a good time together. Today, we are going to roll our prayer time. Usually we have it now, but we're going to do it at the end of service today after the message. And so that's because we have a fun topic. I'm going to say fun in quotation marks. You'll know what it is in a second. But we are going to start with a question first. I'd love for you to turn to a neighbor, say hello, introduce yourself if you haven't met them before, and discuss a question amongst yourselves for a minute or two. And try to think of something that's maybe not too emotional for you. The question is this: can you think of a recent time you disagreed with something or someone? It can be something that you just there was two different opinions in the conversation. It could be something that got you upset, but hopefully you're not upset about it right now at this moment. And so, yeah, try to think of something. It can be light, it can be as heavy as you want to go. But think about it, talk about it with a neighbor for a couple minutes. Online folks, you can put it in the comment section, and then we'll come back together in a moment. Would love to hear some of the conversations. Everyone is generally smiling. I don't see too many people upset. So would love to hear if you guys are interested in sharing. Not something your neighbor shared, maybe just something that you shared. Yeah, you could just raise your hand from where you are. Any folks open to sharing what you thought of or what you talked about? Any volunteers? Yeah. Disagreeing on where to eat. This may be the most frequently disagreed thing on in our church family. There are multiple good places to eat in San Diego is actually the problem. And everyone has their differences of preferences. Get it, we do that all the time. Yeah, what other folks talk about? Was it a hand?
Cereal comes before the milk.
Do you put cereal, do you pour cereal before milk or milk before cereal?
I'm not debating this one.
All right. People are like, oh, I never thought about this. Yeah. Other folks, yeah. Have some examples that you thought about. Yeah. Returning to office effectiveness. So you're talking about the trend for work from home during COVID and companies trying to bring back employees into the office and whether or not it's working. Big disagreement right now in corporate world. big disagreement on whether workers actually want to come in or not. I know some of you guys are dealing with that. Yeah. Disagreeing with a 1-year-old on when they should go to bed. You're going to lose that every single time. Yeah. One of the things, anyone else in person? One of the things, this is the type of stuff we talk about in our household. There's a disagreement when preparing dinner on whether corn counts as a vegetable. When you're making a meal, does corn count as a vegetable? You can ponder that for the next hour. Don't ponder that for that long. Yeah, last bit.
We talked about the cathedral, I think, last week after rehearsal, and so we're like, what counts as like a sushi, and like what counts as like what was the other one called? Cake? A dumpling.
What counts as sushi and what counts as a dumpling?
Can you give an example better than
This sounds like an interesting meal that you guys had. I do like the food themes going on. They seem. I'm hoping we're thinking of safer things as part of what it was. Not trying to get too heated. It is summertime. The AC is on. I'm very thankful for it. We are going to be fighting against the heat outside. I will say thank you for spending your summer vacation here with us, because we know a lot of people who started traveling. This is still, I think, one of the coolest places in the country, which we will take every time. But as the heat heats up, it is also 2024. It is also an election year. And today we're talking about the idea of politics, something that sometimes can heat up our conversations, some things that maybe raise the temperature in our society. For some people, like, we just might have the emotional reaction where we just want to like shut down and go to sleep and wake up in 2025 and hope it's all over and everything's still in one piece. For some of us, we like debating things. We like debating differences of perspectives. We like debating policies, and we enjoy those conversations. Some of us get heated literally and figuratively, where we find ourselves getting to those places where we all of a sudden don't love the person next to us anymore because we want to tear their head off for whatever it is they just said. Whatever our reactions are, there are a lot of them. We're going to be talking about this idea today, and we're going to be talking about how Jesus has something to say in this conversation. How does he actually want to come and be a part of it? I will say today our goal is to talk not about any specific policies or positions. So I know sometimes when the idea of politics come up, we have, each of us probably has some things that we feel very strongly about, and we want to kind of debate those things. That is not our goal for today in this next 30 minutes. There is a place where we're going to talk about those things. And so we do have an upcoming book club that will be starting in July, on July 14th. The book is called Compassion and Conviction, and we'll use that to spur some of those conversations. It is written from a Christian perspective. I like it because it thinks about kind of the nuance that we can have people in disagreement and people can be different. How do we approach things? The goal of that book club is not to get everyone to agree with everything, but it's to have some discussions. And so if you are interested in that, those are some lunchtime discussions that we have after service on Sundays. That'll be starting on July 14th. There's a sign-up sheet in the back. Would love to see you there. Today, our goal, if we're not going to be talking about specific policies and specific issues, we're going to be thinking more generally about Jesus' way for how we interact with, first, our government. Some of us here maybe love the government. We have some people that work for the government before you like jeer and stuff. We also have some of us maybe don't like the government. So we're going to be thinking about that interaction. We're also going to be thinking about the interaction with one another and how we have conversations around the idea of politics. We, I know, have touched on it sometimes here. It is traditionally known, at least in the US, as one of the two topics. You don't talk about the dinner table, religion and politics. We talk about both of them here. And so we're going to be putting them together and thinking about what do we do when we have disagreements. Like, we live in a society, lots of people have different opinions on different things, whether it's food and where we should go eat, whether it's what constitutes a vegetable on a plate, or whether it's what policies should we have regarding rights and how we run the government and how we pass laws. And so we're going to be talking about this idea of when we have disagreements, when we have these strong emotions, when we have these things that are sometimes hard for us to deal with. What does Jesus have to say into that? Does he have a better way? Some of us want to avoid the topic. For those, at least, whatever country you're a citizen of, if it's a democracy, right, part of our responsibility, though, is actually to participate. In some countries, I know it's not in the US, some countries you're actually required to vote. There's actually a penalty, like, if you don't vote. And there's holidays for, like, everyone gets off on election day because everyone's supposed to go vote, right? And so it is part of our duty as citizens. And so we're going to be thinking about this topic. We're going to be thinking how Jesus must have a way to deal with it. We have been in the Bible book of Romans, and so we're going to be getting to chapter 13 today. I'm going to give you a quick, 2 or 3 minute, though, detour. Because if some of you guys have been reading along with us in the Bible book of Romans, which I encourage you to do at home, we're actually skipping a chapter. We're skipping chapter 12. And it's not because it's not important. It's actually one of the most important chapters, maybe, because it's where the book switches from talking about how we understand our relationship with God to the practicals of how do we start loving other people. The reason we're skipping it is because we actually covered it in 5 weeks about a year and a half ago. So there's a 5-week series. You can go back into our website or our YouTube channel and look at it. Back in August, started August 28th of 2022. It was a series called The Labor of Love and how love takes work and effort to do. And so if you want to break down to chapter 12, you can go do it there. But it's interesting for our topic today because the first 11 chapters of Romans talk about how God loves everyone and accepts everyone. The Jews and the Gentiles both should be fully included in the family of God. Spends 11 chapters making sure they get that right. Then in chapter 12, he's like, because of all this, therefore, you are called to love. If you want to be spiritual people, you want to be people who worship God right, he says the way you do that is by loving other people. And so chapter 12 starts breaking down what some of that looks like. Earlier in the book, we've talked about how some of the people were trying to see how spiritual they were. They were trying to feel like they were more spiritual than others. And the letter starts to say, if you want to be spiritual, go out and love other people. You want to show how good of a worshiper you are of God, go out and love other people. And then, right after that, chapter 12, and all these practical things about loving other people, about having our mind, being open to our minds being changed, about caring for the weak and the poor, about honoring other people. And then at the end of chapter 12, it talks about not taking revenge on others. Then it gives us this example about the government and politics. And it's really interesting because if you know anything about that time period, it is in the Roman Empire, and the Jews were in the territory of Judea. They were basically a conquered people that had to do whatever the Roman government told them to do. Not only that, the Roman Empire itself is relatively new. I don't know if you know this. There's some famous things about Rome. It used to be a democracy and a republic, and people voted. That was taken away about less than 100 years before Jesus comes along, right? Where democracy gets taken away and they get an emperor. And so it turns into the Roman Empire. Right? This happens within a generation or two of Jesus. And so you have these people, not only as Jews, who feel like this empire is oppressive and always pushing them around. You also have this whole society that lost democracy and was turned into an empire not that long ago. And we get this as an example of not taking revenge and loving others. And so we're going to hop into Romans chapter 13. We're going to start at verse 1. We're going to read, first we're going to read verses 1 through 7. And this is one of the examples that it starts to give. Let everyone, this is talking to the believers in Rome, let everyone be subject to the governing authorities. For there is no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Consequently, whoever rebels against the authority is rebelling against what God has instituted. And those who do so will bring judgment on themselves. For rulers hold no terror for those who do right, but for those who do wrong. Do you want to be free from fear of the one in authority? Then do what is right, and you will be commended. For the one in authority is God's servant for your good. But if you do wrong, be afraid, for rulers do not bear the sword for no reason. They are God's servants, agents of wrath to bring punishment on the wrongdoer. Therefore, it is necessary to submit to the authorities, not only because of possible punishment, but also as a matter of conscience. This is also why you pay taxes, for the authorities are God's servants who give their full time to governing. Give to everyone what you owe them. If you owe taxes, pay taxes. If revenue, then revenue. If respect, then respect. If honor, then honor. Interesting stuff. Some stuff that maybe some of us are like, nah, that's not in the Bible. This is a joke, right? Like, I don't want to hear that. Like, you're saying God says these things to us? This is the letter from Paul to the church in Rome, the center of the Roman Empire, that was made up of believers who were, just by being Christian, a minority at the time in the empire. Also made up of Jews and Gentiles, a mix of them. People who've lived in this oppressive government didn't like, necessarily, who was in charge. This is the letter that Paul writes as one of the big examples for how to love other people. And he breaks down how not only should you, yes, be paying attention to them, God is actually at work in the midst of your oppressive government that maybe you think is corrupt, that maybe you don't agree with. Like, God is actually doing something there. So let's take a look at that and break some of that down. In verse 1, it talks about how there's no authority except that which God has established. The authorities that exist have been established by God. Right? God has a reason for the authorities to be in place. We might not agree with the authorities. We might not like the authorities. We might not want things to go the way that they go. But at a general level, God has put those in place. And he's actually put in place for our good. Now, that doesn't mean that God endorses every single thing that authorities do. It doesn't mean that God is telling them to do everything that they end up doing. And it doesn't mean that God likes that they are the ones that are in place. It's saying that God uses whoever is in place to help bring about some important things. It's part of giving structure to society. It's part of taking care of people. So this is not supposed to be a justification. Sometimes it is said, like, you know, when someone's candidate wins, and they're like, oh yeah, they're ordained by God. God's the one that put them there. Like, God chose them. Like, it's not talking about the specific people. It's talking about in general. God has governments there for a reason, and they do something good, even when they're corrupt. Now, let's think about this a little bit. For example, let's say you disagree with one of the policies about like reproductive rights. Right? We still want the stoplights to work so we don't get in car accidents. Right? We still want our trash to get picked up. Or there's times when we don't agree with how things are going with immigration, or we don't trust the judge who was elected. Right? Like, we still want teachers to teach kids. We still want everything else to run well in society, right? And so there are parts of it, yes, that we might not like. But he's saying that some of it is there still for our good. Not just for us, for everyone, for all of society. Right? There is a bunch that is still helping out. And so I know I have this temptation. I'm guessing, I'm not going to accuse anyone here. I'm guessing some of us here too have that temptation. When things aren't the way that we want, when we don't like the results, we start thinking all these bad thoughts about the people that are there and how they're evil and how we're going to resist them and we're going to like stop paying our taxes or stop, move to another country, whatever it is, right? God is saying in the Roman Empire, hey, I put the Roman Empire there. They are, at least at a general level, doing things to take care of you. Pay your taxes, follow the laws. Right? Gives two reasons for this. Verse 3, it talked about to not fear the authorities. If you fear the government, if the Jews and the Gentiles who were believers at the time were fearing the Roman Empire, he's saying you don't have to fear them if you follow the law. So the first was just a practical thing. Like, you are a Christian, try to do good. Part of that doing good is following the law. If you do that, you don't have to fear them. You don't have to worry about them. Now, this is in general. I know you just thought of 20 exceptions. This is talking about in general, right? Most of the laws are perfectly good, and we like them. We don't want other people stealing our stuff. We don't want other people just coming up randomly and hitting us when they're mad at us, right? There's a whole bunch of laws that are good, right? And he's saying this, again, in the midst of the Roman Empire, which, no, I don't think was fair to the Christians or the Jews at the time. But it's part of how God keeps us in line. He's talking in general, this is part of how we learn to do good, is by the rules. Part of how we know how to do good. There are a whole bunch of laws that help us to be citizens that respect other people, right? Even if we disagree with them. Like, do we want sometimes to play our music loudly? Yeah. Does that infringe maybe on someone who's next to us? Yes, right? Are the things that if we could do anything we wanted, would be really fun for us? Yeah, but would it probably hurt some people sometimes? Also, yes. And so in general, he's talking about not fearing authorities. If you want to not fear them, he says, follow the laws. Again, we're talking in the corrupt Roman Empire. By doing right, you won't be punished. The second reason, though, he actually goes a little bit higher. In verse 5, he says that we should do these things because we're believers and because we have the Holy Spirit who is causing us to do right. It says do it because of your conscience. Do it because you are called as people to do what is good and to do what is right. Now, this can be hard to think about because we can think about all the things that we don't like, the things that we don't agree with, the things that we don't think we should have to do. And it's tempting to keep going down that thought trail. Now, I think many times we stop ourselves and we don't actually carry out whatever thought it was about harming someone or tearing down some building or not paying our taxes, whatever it is. I keep going to taxes. I'll bring that up later. I'll tell you why. When we think about all of the ways of life that God gives his people in the Bible, all of them are good, right? All of them lead to life. We trust that God is trying to bring about goodness for us. He is saying by following the law, you will bring those things about. And more so than that, there's this bigger point. And the point of this section is that the reason we can do these things and not worry about them, even the bad stuff, is because God is over and above the government. Like, God is higher than any authority that is here on earth. The good ones and the bad ones. The ones we agree with, the ones we don't agree with. God is over and above all of it. And it talks about, like, just because you are trying to follow God, like, follow these things, right? If we want to serve God, pay your taxes. If we want to follow God's commands, don't break the laws of the land. If we love God, it says do what's right, right? There is this thing, the word revenue in there is more like customs and fees. So, like, I know it's a debate right now. There's all these extra junk fees and hidden charges that we're getting hit with. Because it's like, they might be corrupt and they might be wrong, but if you're being charged with those things, pay them, right? That's what he's simply saying. Now, what about the 20 exceptions that you guys all have in your mind right now? You're like, well, what do we do when the laws are unjust? What do we do when it is violating someone's rights or it is harming people? A couple of thoughts on that. First of all, we, at least right here in the United States, do live in a democracy, right? Part of being a good citizen, as I mentioned earlier, we actually are expected to participate in that democracy. That means paying attention to what is going on. That means voting based on our values. That means having discussions with others, even as we educate ourselves. These are all part of the democratic process, even debating, even protesting, right? At least in the United States, and I know this privilege is not everywhere in the world, Like, that is part of the fabric of our democracy. It's like, hey, yeah, when we are upset about things, we are supposed to go knocking on doors, calling our congressmen, talking to our neighbors, peacefully protesting, all of those things, right? That is part of the process. And so, at least in the United States, we are supposed to participate in that way. Just as it's telling us to pay our taxes, pay what you owe, like, we're supposed to also participate. And I would say, for some of us that, like, want to put our heads completely in the sand and, like, don't care about the election, like, yeah, you should pay attention at least at some level, because you are supposed to be one of the voices. Now, as I say that, also want to acknowledge that Christians in the United States can be on polar opposite sides of many issues too. So the fact that we just participate and we say we are doing what God wants doesn't mean we are necessarily doing what God wants. It doesn't necessarily mean that we are right on every single issue, because people with different perspectives can believe they are both seeking out God's values. There's not one biblical approach to every issue. There are to some, but not to all of them. But this all falls in this category then of like following the law, being someone who is there for the good of society and not trying to just tear things down. But there's also some more going on here. There's a couple things I want to point out. One, there's another reason to not break the law here, and there's something subtle in the Gospels and in these letters as well. And this goes back even to the idea of Jesus. There's this concept of like following the law to actually expose evil. So if you go back to the end of chapter 12, when it talks about not taking revenge, it says leave room for God. God's the one that'll bring vengeance. It says respond to evil with good. Why? It doesn't say ignore the evil. It says when we respond to evil with good, it will heap burning coals on their heads because it'll make them look bad. Now, let's do a hypothetical. Let's say we were getting pulled over or arrested for some unjust reason, right? And we fight back. What does that look like? What does that do, right? It justifies us getting arrested or pulled over, whatever it is, right? It went from being their problem to our problem. When we take it, we get arrested, we take whatever due punishment has come, what does it do? It puts the onus on the unjust system. Let me give you an example. The example comes from Jesus. There's this famous verse from Jesus, Matthew 5, verse 41, says, if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2 miles. It's the source of the idiom going the extra mile. Right? And Jesus is instructing people, again, in the Roman Empire, says, if you're called to go 1 mile, go a 2nd mile. He's talking about this idea of Roman soldiers at the time were allowed to pick a random person on the street and go, hey, I need you to carry my backpack and my supplies for me. Doesn't matter what you're doing, you got to stop doing your job, you got to stop your life, whatever is going on. You got to pick up his backpack, you got to carry it a mile. You can verify this. This is actually the origin of mile markers on roads. They actually marked out miles because the Roman citizens wanted to know how far is the mile, and then I got to stop, right? And so they would ask people, pick up the backpack, carry it a mile. And Jesus was instructing his followers and the crowd to do this. Someone makes you pick up the backpack, go the mile. Then he says what? He says, then carry it a 2nd mile. And it's interesting because I think sometimes we think of that as benevolent. Like, yeah, carry the backpack a 2nd mile. We're being extra nice, right? There's a problem. They weren't allowed to make you carry the backpack 2 miles or 3 miles or 4 miles. And so what would happen if the soldier was calling you to carry his backpack for a mile, and you carried it a 2nd mile? What does that look like? It looks like the soldier made you carry it for 2. Is he allowed to do that? No. Would he get in trouble with his commanding officers? Probably. Does it expose the corrupt idea that they are forcing you to carry the backpack at all? Yes. Jesus was about subverting power, right? Saying these things, go the extra mile. Saying these things like submit to the authorities wasn't just for us to be doormats and to like agree with everything and just whatever they're doing is fine and nothing, is wrong and unjust with it. Jesus is going about it in a different way. He fights back with love. And it's really strange because we don't naturally think that way. Our first impulse isn't, okay, I'm going to carry the backpack the second mile for you. Like, we're thinking about all the things we want to do to them besides carrying the backpack. What Jesus is calling us to is a different way. He's showing us first that direct attack wasn't the only way to resist, right? There was a way of subverting. Many people ask along the way, like, how come Jesus didn't overthrow the empire? How come Jesus didn't get rid of the governing authorities? How come Jesus didn't end all oppression at the time? Part of it was he goes about to try to change things subtly through love and kindness instead. Right? And so I find it interesting that even in like this ungodly, oppressive empire that's ruling over them, God called his people to still respect them, to still give them honor. Right? The fact that God is over and above the government means at one level that like no matter what they do, no matter how bad it is, God is still in control and God is still protecting us. But higher than that, it's also pointing us to something bigger. There is a way that is better than their way. There is a way that is higher than their way, and we can expose it by living that other way. By not just seeking revenge, by not just trying to do evil to those who did evil to us, but by coming back with love. Right? Now, it's interesting because this is what it talks about for how the citizens of Rome were thinking about their government at the time. And that has all sorts of implications. I know some of us are thinking about the governments we're under and what that means. This idea also has some interesting implications for how we talk to one another as well. Because if God is in control, if he's over and above the government, what does that do to our arguments about politics? How many of us have had an argument just over politics before? Right? Like, I have. I've had probably lots of them. Probably more than I wish that I would have had. I've had times where we're having a casual dinner conversation. I think we're on the same page on some topic. I hear a comment that goes against what I was thinking, and I like exploded. Right? That's happened more than once. I try not to do that anymore. I try really hard, but it's tempting, right? And it's natural. But more so than trying to win arguments, God has something bigger. Verse 8. Let no debt remain outstanding except the continuing debt to love one another. For whoever loves others has fulfilled the law. The commandments, you shall not commit adultery, you shall not murder, you shall not steal, you shall not covet, and whatever other command there may be, are summed up in this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Love does no harm to a neighbor, therefore love is the fulfillment of the law. We are called to more than just complaining about our government. We are called to more than just arguing over politics. Right? And so if this is the interaction we're supposed to have with the governing authorities who rule over us, what does it mean for the way we talk to each other? Right? That God has this higher calling of love for us. We're called to more than just being a rebellious citizen. That was some of the inclination of some of the Jews in the Roman Empire. There was a group of them called the Zealots. Their goal for bringing about God's way in the world was they were going to fight for it, literally. They wanted to stop the oppressors by overthrowing them violently. And Jesus comes in with his way of love instead. This way that wasn't to attack, the way that was to bless, to honor, to respect. Now, at one level, these verses that we're reading here talk about how following society's laws help us follow God's laws because all of them are wrapped up in the idea of loving and respecting other people. You follow the Roman laws, you won't be harming your neighbor, and you'll be following God's ultimate command, love your neighbor as yourself. It's interesting here, it says, let no debt remain, right? Like if you were going to not pay your taxes because you don't agree with the government, he's like, pay your taxes so that the only debt that you have left is God calling you to love other people. This was very poignant for me. The reason taxes has been on my mind, I'm still owed my tax return from like 4 months ago. Like they got a couple $1,000s that belonged to me, right? And are taking their sweet time. I still got to wait 8 more weeks at least. Like, right? Like, should I be upset at that? Probably. Were there some points where like I'm frustrated and want to yell about it? Maybe. Like, God's like, hey, let the government do their thing. Still respect the IRS. When you're on the phone with an IRS agent, still treat them nicely. Like, don't chew them out. Be kind to them still. Like, God says, focus on loving. Like, it's interesting because it's a different way, right? When we go and try to fight back, if Jesus had his followers pick up swords and go try to attack the authorities and the Roman soldiers and get rid of them from all of the territory of Judea, then who's the problem, right? Maybe both of them are, right? But when Jesus comes back and calls his followers to love people, it shows what right is and it shows what corruption is. The same thing happens in our conversations with one another, right? When I think big picture about what does our political, polarized world look like now, it looks like us trying to all kill each other. Like, it doesn't matter what side. Like, all sides right now seem like they just want to kill each other. Right? Like, who's winning in that? Is either side winning? To me, it seems like Satan's winning. It seems like we're all losing. And so there's got to be something different for how we go and approach these conversations, how we interact with our neighbors, with our coworkers, with our family members. I've been reflecting a lot for this topic on the idea that for Jesus, the weightier law is love. The weightier law is love. The thing that overrides everything that's going on in this world is this idea of love. Everything he says is summed up with loving one another. What does that mean? That more so than us worrying about which laws are right or wrong, and which policies I agree with or don't agree with, or you agree with and don't agree with, God calls us to focus on love. Right? It's normal and healthy to debate things that we disagree with others with. It is. But we can debate and disagree in ways that are loving, and we can debate and disagree in ways that are unloving. Right? One of those is the way of Jesus. One isn't. How do we do that? Right? One important thing in that is remembering that more important than being right and winning arguments or having our political party win the election is to remember that we're on a mission of love. To remember we have a call that is higher than all of the political agendas in this world, every single one of them. Whatever platform a politician is running on, whatever policies or laws are most important to us, bigger than that is our mission to love and help other people see God's love. Right? Because it happens even when it's our side that wins, guess what? We still have a call to love. And when it's the other side that wins, we still have a call to love. God has given us something that makes not the other stuff go away, it makes everything else look a little bit smaller. Now, I know you're thinking, well, what about don't some of these things harm other people? So in the idea to love others, shouldn't we be working to try to make the laws not harm other people? Yeah, I agree. I think we should be working on those things, right? But is us fighting with our coworker, in the break room, gonna help accomplish that? I'm not sure. I'm not sure it is. It's interesting when we think about Jesus' way, for having these conversations when perspectives are different. When someone makes a statement we disagree with, I know I've had that thought, and I don't think I've ever said it out loud, but I think things like, you're stupid, right? You're crazy. How can you believe that? Right? Like, I don't know if you're tempted by that. I hear some laughter. I'm tempted by that. Right? Like, is that godly? I don't know that I could ever say that it was. Right? What's our motivation in these conversations? Sometimes our motivation is to feel right, and we like feeling right and winning arguments. Sometimes our motivation is we are acting out of our woundedness and the ways that we have been harmed in the past. Sometimes our motivation is because we don't like other people and we don't want others to get good. What Jesus is calling us to is something else. Instead of trying to win arguments, to try to win hearts. Right? To focus not on necessarily the content of our response, but the tone of our response and the delivery. Like, he's not saying don't debate. Jewish culture, if you don't know, is full of debate. They would memorize scripture and they would debate it. And they would talk about, what does this mean? And there would be disagreements, and they'd be like, this is their dinner table. Right? And so wrestling, the very name Israel means wrestling with God, right? So we are supposed to have differences and be struggling with how we work them out. But there is a way to do it that God is calling to us that is different. And he wants us to bring his way in this world. He does. But how he did it, we look to Jesus as our model. Did Jesus come in with an army and try to change society by conquering it? No. He came as this humble servant. He came to sacrifice for other people. He came to defend the weak and the poor. He came and he sacrificed himself on the cross, giving up his own life for the sake of others. That humility is something that I think that we all need. To recognize we're not going to be 100% right all the time. None of us are. And that we can be open to others' opinions as part of respecting them, as part of honoring them. Does God have a way that's different in this world? Yes. Does he want us to bring that way? Yes. But we need to do it his way. Honestly, right now in our context, our world has seen enough of Christians trying to get their way through power and coercion and corruption. Like, if I'm tired of anything, I'm tired of that. I'm tired of the reputation Christians have got, like, for politics and government in our current world. Let's show the world a different way. Let us, as Jesus followers, show the world that God's ways are humility and honor and love. We're going to pause because you have questions. Let's discuss. Raise your hand from where you are. We have a microphone. We'll start over here.
This topic is a tough topic, so because the first thing, like especially as being African American, like you say, like, if the police arrest you, because like they have a thing called the talk for black sons, that what you do when you're pulled over, and even though you've done all the things that are right, you still you possibly get harmed.
Yeah.
But that's the point that's the thing, that first point. But really my second one, so I'm not sure anybody knows who Colin Kaepernick is. Mm-hmm. So he used to take a knee,
As a football player.
And he got like so much backlash about it. But years later, as basically he was kind of like the centerpiece for like the whole social justice movement. But the point I'm trying to make is that just because he was willing to take a knee, and then everybody figured out, like, he gave him a reason why to do it, but when it first happened, the amount of like backlash that one person gets to kind of get the movement started. So like, I don't know what, I only have a question. I don't know if you want to.
Yeah, it's interesting. You're talking about kind of this development, too, that happened over time. Because the way it was perceived at first, here is this one football player who's a person of color, who's disrespecting, people would say, we're disrespecting the government or the flag, or something like that, by taking a knee during the national anthem. And yeah, it was looked at as wrong. Was it breaking any rules or illegal? Like, no. And so over time, what happens is people were like, well, he's actually doing it in a way. He's still there. He didn't walk out, right? He didn't go wave a banner or tear down the flag or something like that. And the perception started to change. Like, hey, he is within his legal rights and he's protesting. And it started to gain more momentum. And it's interesting because if he had done something violent or destructive, I don't know that the sentiment goes that way, right? And he got way more flack than any person should have to deal with. I'm sure he did. And that happens sometimes with the person that starts the movement and goes first, absolutely. It's interesting, when we think about, a bigger picture question that I think about is how do we actually get change? How does change actually happen, right? And this idea of getting the hearts of society to change, more so than just the laws, I think is really interesting. Because the more I've thought about it this week, I think that's what Jesus was actually going for. It wasn't to change the laws of the Roman Empire or change the Roman Empire and change the oppressor. If you look at the story of the Bible, one oppressor leaves and another oppressor just comes in. Right? It was, hey, can we get people to see that there's ways of love and forgiveness that are better? And not everyone ends up agreeing with it, but it does show what the evil is. Living those lives of love showed where the evil actually lied. Was Colin Kaepernick taking a knee, was that some mean-spirited thing? And after a while, people were no. He did it super respectfully and super peacefully. What that shows was, hey, there are actually other corruptions that he's pointing to that are the bigger deal. That conversation, yeah, honestly, I don't think goes the same way if it's something violent or if it's something that harms other people. I know there's some of you guys actually might have even studied this. There's whole realms of thought on this idea about protest and how to protest, and I know there's not agreement in all of that. We could think back on some of the ones what was effective, what was not effective. It's a weird balance. I do believe God calls us to stand up for justice, calls us to fight to protect people who are oppressed and who are harmed. We also have this, and he's be a law-abiding citizen. Was it in the realm of be a law-abiding citizen so that when you protest it's more effective? Maybe. I don't know the complete thoughts. We have some of this. We have some more subverting. There's some other things that Jesus and his followers did to subvert power without outright attacking it and trying to take it over. The implications are interesting, though. We've had, I wouldn't say more corrupt, we've had more of corrupt governments, certainly over the history of humanity, that have been very bad and even still exist today. I don't know how to apply to someone who is currently a victim of some of those things. It seems like a high calling if Jesus is keep following the law, even though they're attacking you and harming you. I don't know that the Roman Empire was that much better than some of these things. Yeah, that's what I keep going back to. Roman Empire was pretty bad. We get the sanitized version in history books because it's founding of Western society. But yeah, interesting stuff.
My main point is when you're trying to do right, with Dr. Martin Luther King, being nonviolent, he suffered a lot.
Yeah.
And that's to me the scary part, because you want to do right in the name of the Lord, but the amount of suffering before it becomes mainstream that's the hard part, and you suffer a lot. So that's really the hard part, doing right and suffering at the same time.
Yeah. Thanks. Can you get that? Thank you. Yeah. Jesus suffered, Paul suffered, like they all did. It's interesting, like, are we supposed to go seek out suffering? I don't think so. The implications of this passage seem to be, if you receive punishment for that, take your punishment, which we don't want to hear. Like, as a part of following the law, I mean, that's what Paul did. There's an example of him in Acts. He gets arrested. It's just for telling people about Jesus. And then I think it's an earthquake where the jail breaks open and they could run away, and he ends up staying in jail to take a sentence. And I don't know if that's an act of love, right? It's an act of following the law, ends up winning over the jailer. So, like, it's almost insulting to us, but these are the examples that Jesus gives us, that we have in the Bible. Like, Jesus gave himself up, unjustly arrested, tortured, like farce trial, executed. Like, we'd say all of it's unjust. That's what he did. I can't argue against that. You know. I know that's hard stuff. You know. I definitely hear you on that. Other thoughts and questions? You know. Yeah, let's come over here.
Yeah, I was thinking about this, and I feel like kind of what we've said today mostly works from my current situation in life. But let's say tomorrow I'm homeless, relying on, say, a church for a soup kitchen that feeds me. And as far as I can tell, it seems like sleeping while homeless is basically illegal. Maybe not really, but like there's lots of laws there. And, you know, I've heard of soup kitchens getting shut down by the city for zoning violations. And like when it would seem that my very survival relies on the law being broken by myself or others, what do?
Yeah. Like, at a very base level, what it sounds like to me is like, if a police officer comes and tells you to move, right? Paul or Jesus would be like, yeah, just move and go where they tell you to go. And that might be a worse place, that might suck more. I don't know that fighting back is what they would say to do. Like, so the situation sucks and the situation is corrupt, right? Like, there's the practical part of it where you're saying you avoid punishment by following the law. Like, it's saying, like, if you fight back, all they're gonna do is throw you in jail. Like, and so it's not like you're gonna win anything in there. I do think the onus is on the rest of us in society who aren't in that situation to be trying to change it for better. Like, in our side, I know this is in theory, I know it doesn't always work perfectly, but we all vote, and we elect the council members, and they pass the ordinances in San Diego. And so, in theory, all of these things have, at least in some way, come from us at a level. I know there's corruption. I know it doesn't all go the way that it should. And we're supposed to advocate for better laws for instance, like the unhoused folks in our society, right? Like, one of the things that got me really interested in how our government funds veteran services is from like working with veterans who couldn't get their medications. And I'm like, I want to help this guy get his medication. And the VA is like not getting him his medication. And like he can't get an appointment. Like, we need to fund the VA better. And so like, does his situation suck? Can I relieve it maybe momentarily, like depending on what the medication is, maybe, right? Like, what else can I do? I can go try to advocate for getting people to like fund the stuff better and for the policies to be better. Like, me going in and like burning down like a pharmacy like isn't gonna help. And so it's interesting, it sucks because there's a whole bunch that we can't change. And there's a whole bunch of like, we can't get to the solutions that should be there without like 18 steps in between and years. And I think that's part of what it is to like live in a sinful society, like where things aren't run the way that God would want them to be run. I think what we would like sometimes is a solution where we can snap our fingers or like say the right prayer or something and like God makes it better. And I think he gives us the really hard path of like try to make society better by the ways that you have to make society better while following Jesus, you know, along the way. And that's a hard path. That's maybe the hardest. Like, so much of the stuff we talk about is like our individual hearts, and then it's our individual relationships with other people. And like this is talking about like society. Well, like I'm not a president or a congressman. Like, how do we change these things? This stuff's hard. I don't have a perfect answer for it either. Yeah.
Thanks, Scott. No, I mean, just to kind of echo what Alex is saying, but also, outside of even our own, I mean, we're lucky in the sense, like you said, we have a democracy and we have the ability at least to advocate and participate and potentially change minds and change laws. But I think this passage becomes problematic even more so in like other parts of the world where governments are truly oppressive, truly unjust, laws are truly oppressive, and people, you kind of implied like about the Roman Empire was not a kind empire. It was not fair or just in the way we would think of it. So I mean, it's sort of an observation, sort of a. I mean, just there's parts of the world where, and you also referenced this too, where Christians actually use Christians perverting the Word of God to gain power. So I think there's parts of the world where governments try to use ally themselves with whatever Christian movement is in their country to basically coerce their people into submission. And I think, I mean, that's a hard thing. I don't know, and I think, like you said, there's no easy answer to it. But in a way, at least in the United States, we do have the options of peaceful resistance. I think it's also interesting too that you also referenced like Paul, in a way, contradicts himself by getting himself arrested multiple times, going to jail for breaking the law, however arbitrary that might have been. So I think this is a tough passage. I don't know. But I do appreciate the way you bring it back to love. Like, how are we called to resist? Like, not hatefully, but even though we might be angry. But I think.
Yeah, and I will say what you're talking about too. So when I use the phrasing, love is the weightier law, there's this idea in Jewish culture, one of the things they debated was like when two commands of God seem to contradict, or like you're in a situation where you can't do both. So what you're talking about, like following the law, or like, let's say feeding someone, right? Like at a soup kitchen. Like, we're like, well, God tells us to do both of those things. Right now, in this situation, they seem to contradict. Which one do I do? Like, I do think God calls love to be the weightier law. And so, like, feeding the person sounds right. Like, if we're in Holocaust Germany and, like, is it hide this person or answer the authority? Like, are you hiding a person? I think hiding the person and saving their life seems like the more loving, right thing to do. Like, and so I do think there are situations where it pop up that way. And like you're saying, there's other countries right now, there's other places where we could live where that is the choice. Like, and I do think God calls to that. It's not explicitly listed that way in the Bible. I think we have enough examples of that. But there's also this idea where, like, do it in ways that's not going to get you in more trouble. So, like, if we're going to go, like, try to keep feeding folks in a way that's going to get us in trouble, like, try to do it with staying out of the way. Try to do it with, like, not being, well, we're just going to open the soup kitchen. The soup kitchen thing, by the way, is an example from this neighborhood, UTC. Like, yeah, so it's hard because we're like trying to do it without, at a practical level, if you do it in a way that you get in trouble, like you can't do it anymore. And so there's some practicality to that. Like, we hope we're never in some of those situations, but like they happen all the time in our world. I will say just one caveat. I think we can take that too far sometimes as an idea and apply it to a situation where it's like, that ends up being one of the arguments sometimes in our political disagreements, right? Like, my way is better. It's more biblical than your way that you said was biblical, and that justifies like cheating in an election or things like that. And so make sure that we're not using it to justify things that actually aren't just about love, they're about something else. But yes, in general, yeah. I think some of the privilege of living in our society is that we don't have to face that as often. There are plenty of people that were facing that much more than we are currently. And that's hard. Yeah, what does it look like to keep loving? I don't know. Yeah.
One of the challenges, I think, of passages like this is how much we generalize and how much Paul, in a letter to specific people, is talking about also a specific situation. I guess the way, maybe I'd suggest the following way of interpreting it. The general principle is God is a God of order. I'd say that's the first general principle. I don't think the passage necessarily says you have to obey every single law, because the laws are made by humans, some of which are, I would say, oppressive and wrong, and some of which are good for us. We see other examples in the Bible where, for example, when I think Peter and John are arrested by the religious, I'm going to say authorities, right? They make the argument, it's better to obey God rather than man. So I think there are different situations where you will decide different things. So again, the way I think about the Romans passage is, in general, God is a God of order, and then specific examples are given of what that order might look like. But again, since this is a letter written to specific people at a specific time, if I think about the historical context, one of the big issues of the day was the significant segments of the Jewish society really wanting to revolt against Rome. I know you mentioned the Zealots, but this was probably a much wider and broader movement. And so I think one of the ways of interpreting this section of Paul's letter, and I think this is not the main thrust of Romans, but it is at the part where he says, those of you who are thinking about rebelling against Rome, don't do that. And I feel that this is very much in line with Jesus' message in the Gospels, which is, don't rebel against Rome, because what's going to happen is they are going to come and destroy the temple that you love, which is essentially what happened after that. And so given that Romans was written probably in the period, which was written in the period just before that destruction of the first temple, with all that rebellion coming up, and we know 40, 50 AD, this came up a lot. I think that that's a way of thinking about the context of this Romans passage and not trying to overgeneralize it, even though, again, God is a God of order, but the parts of the message and examples were specifically to remind the Jewish people in Rome, you should not be rebelling against Rome. This is not God's way.
Yeah, I think that context is definitely really important. Yeah, so thanks for that. Yeah, so this idea, like, it's not going to apply in every single situation, on those things. Like, what does it look like then to tease those things apart? This idea that you're talking about is like how we weigh some of the specific situations. Come back in July, we're talking about the topic of wisdom. And so that wisdom is all about how do we apply, like in which situations. And this stuff's hard, yeah. The rule of thumb, I think that you're talking about, when you say, like, follow the laws until they're like corrupt or they're telling us to do things that go against God. And then what do we do at that point? Resist or not do them? Yes, I've heard that as well. Interesting stuff. Thanks for that, though. That context is definitely helpful. Yeah. Is there a hand over this way? I am then going to ask us to do something. For our prayer time, I'm going to ask us to think about this idea of love and how we can keep growing in it. Again, there are specific situations where talking about, like, what do we do when two things conflict? There are going to be many of those. That is, need to be taken on a case-by-case basis. In general, when we think about the conversations we have in this area, the conversation our society has gotten in currently in our context, the way that we deal with laws and politics and the election that's coming up, and there's going to be debates coming up soon and all that stuff. What does it look like to be people who are living out Jesus' way in the midst of it? I know there's a part of that is voting and following the values that we have. There's also the way that we have conversations. 2 suggestions for what you can pray for. First, I think the idea of loving other people that we disagree with, like respecting them and honoring them, I think is important. And so think about, is there someone who I have disagreed with? whether that's a person or the government or a party or a side, and just pray for their good. Pray for something for God to care for them. Pray for God to love them. Pray for God to provide for them. Right? Like even if that's like a horrible, corrupt leader like that you don't like, yeah, pray for the good. Pray for that God works in their lives. Second option is ask God just to grow your heart of love. Like, if you recognize them just ways that I have been thinking about other motivations, I have been responding in other ways, like what are the ways that I can keep growing as a loving person? So ask God to give you a heart of love. If you can't think of any of those things, that is okay. Come before God and sit before Him and God, like, show me, what do you have for me? What do you need from me today? The way that we do this here is we invite you to get together with a couple people around you in some groups. If you don't feel comfortable praying out loud, not a problem. Just let your group know you'd like to listen in and you kind of think about these ideas. But we're going to invite you to find a couple people, get into some groups of 2 or 3 or 4, reflect on these things, come to God in prayer, and then we'll bring them back together in a few minutes. So let's pray together. Let's come together in prayer. God, we definitely need you in this world. The more we just live our lives and see what is happening, the more we recognize that we need your ways. We need better than the ways that humanity has come up with. And so we pray, God, that you would help bring those ways. We know that you have a call for us in the midst of that. And so would you show us how to be your people, how to bring about what you want in this world. We pray for your mercy and for your justice, because we know it doesn't always happen. Things don't go the way that they should. But I pray for each of us that you would help us to see how you need to change each of our hearts to be a part of how this world will ultimately know that you are a God of love. And so we bring ourselves to you. We bring the entire Christian church to you. We say, come in. Help us to be the people that you need us to be for this world. We pray these things in the name of your Son. Amen. Online folks will